Hey everyone, it's Matt here with Nightrun Studio, and in this video, we're going to set up the attribute side of our player progression system. We'll set things up so that you can add points onto each of your different attributes, all of them pulling from a pool of available points. You can hit cancel to reset back to the defaults, or confirm to make the changes permanent. We'll show two ways of doing this. One is a sort of character creation style, where you can also subtract points below the base and spend them however you want. Or a second style where once points are confirmed, they do become permanent and can only be changed with some sort of special item. Anyways, that's where we're headed in this video. Let's get started. Alright, since we created our UI in the first video, we're ready to just get scripting here. So first of all, let's create a new folder, which we can call player progression. And then inside, let's create a new mono behavior script. And this first one is going to be our attribute script. Now this one's going to be a little different from anything we've created before, as it's going to be a pure data and logic container. And so we're actually going to get rid of using Unity Engine and just add that this is system serializable. We will no longer be inheriting from mono behavior, as like I said, it's just going to be a data class, which means we need to get rid of start and update as we won't have access to those. At this point, we can actually just choose which attributes we want to start with and set them all up as integers. Now these integers will represent our permanent stats, but we're also going to need a place to keep track of the stats that we're using in preview when we're trying out adding new points to see what combination we like. And so we'll create a new method here called clone, which is going to create an exact copy of our attributes. So each time clone is called, we're going to return a new list of attributes, where the power will just have the same value as our base stat power and the same with each of our other stats. So now we've got our base stats as well as a way to clone them. But we're also going to need a way for other scripts to actually be able to get these values. So we'll create a public int method called get. And here we could use a string where other scripts just pass in the name of the stat that they want to get the value of. However, this is not type safe. So I want to protect against that. So let's come down to the bottom here where we can make a public enum called attribute type, and then we'll just type in the name of each of our attributes. Here I'm going to use a capital letter just to distinguish it from the actual integer value. Now then, whenever we want to get the value of one of these attributes, we'll just pass in that attribute type. I'll just call it type for short here, and it will return the value of the stat that we're looking for. Now we can do this in a super condensed way. So here we'll return the result of a switch based on the type that got passed in. So essentially, if the type passed in was the attribute type of power, this is just going to return the value of our power integer. And we'll just go through and do the same for each of the others. At the bottom here, we're just going to add a lambda expression one last time that leads to a 0. This is just a default, so that if for some reason we pass in a type that doesn't exist, instead of giving us an error, it would just return a 0 value. Now the final thing we need to do is just create a method that allows us to actually change these values. We'll call this one set. It'll take in the attribute type we want to change, as well as an integer for the new amount. So here, this switch will be based on the type that gets passed in, and we'll just write in each of our cases. So the first case will be if the attribute type was power, and if power was passed in, then we'll just make our new power value equal to whatever value just got passed in. Now we could write this over 3 lines, and feel free to do that if that's more readable for you. The break statement just keeps us from evaluating any further into the statement once we've already found the value that we need to change. That's it. I'm going to just take this and create it all in one line just to keep things nice and condensed, and then I'll just change it for each of our different attributes. Now that we've got our attributes, let's start creating the system that's actually going to make all of this happen. This is going to be our progression manager. It probably won't shock you to know that we're going to get rid of these start and update methods. And then actually, I just want to start with a header to keep us organized, and we're going to begin by doing some UI references. The first will be a TextMesh Pro reference to our points text, and in order to make that work, we are going to have to add that we're using TM Pro. Later on, we'll add a reference to each of our attribute slots, but we haven't created those yet, so I'm just going to put a note for now. Beneath this, let's make a new header for our different settings. This is going to include a public integer for how many points we have available, and I'm just going to default mine to a value of 5. We're also going to make a private integer, and this one is going to be our starting points. Essentially, this will just be a copy of the available points that allows us to edit one, but always keep track of what it was at the start of the session so that when we cancel, we can reset things back to their previous values. Next, we'll want to actually keep track of our attributes. So we'll have a public attributes here called base attributes, and these are the sort of permanent or real stats. And then we'll also have another list of attributes, which are going to be the preview ones. These will be the ones that we change and can reset away from if needed. All right, now as soon as the game begins, we are going to run a start method where we'll want to initialize things. Now here I'm going to make my starting points equal to my available points. This just creates a sort of snapshot of where our points were at the start of this session so that we can return to them if we hit cancel. I also want to take my preview attributes and just make them equal to whatever the base attributes were. And to do that, we'll clone them, making an exact copy. I'll leave a note here because once we've set up our slots, we'll want to actually get their UI and values all set up. And then we're going to want to just refresh the UI here for our points. Let's create that method now. We'll call it refresh UI. And essentially what we just want to do here is make sure that our points text has its text set to whatever our available points are. We do have to convert this to a string since integers and strings don't play nice. I'll then just make a little note here that later on we'll also want to refresh whatever numbers are on our slots at this point. Now if we pop into Unity, we can click on player progression and add our progression manager. We then want to grab our TextMesh Pro reference, so we'll just look under our attributes menu here and grab the points text. At this point, if I open up the base and preview attributes, you'll notice that the values are all set to 0, and that makes sense as we haven't initialized those. So let's actually head into our attributes script here and set some base values. I'm just going to put all of mine at 10 for now. Now, even after this updates, if we head back into our menu, you'll notice the values are still sitting at 0. That's just because they initialized at 0 because I didn't put them in at first. And if we go up to the ellipsis here and just hit reset, it will actually go back to the base values. The only problem is that also got rid of my points text reference, so we'll just have to re-add that. Now this is not super exciting. It essentially just updates the available points. And you'll notice that I'm getting an error. If you've been following along with our other series, you'll probably be seeing this as well. And it's just because we're running this in the pure bootstrap scene without any room, and so it's noticing there's no room service. If we actually open up the room transition manager, we can get rid of this error if you're inclined to do so. So if we just add if service is not null into both of these methods, it'll just make sure that anytime we're not actually in a room and there's no room service, we don't get errors. Now at this point, it would sure be nice if our attribute slots were actually updating their values, so we'll create our final script for this video. This one is going to be our attributes slot script. Now inside of here, we'll just get rid of our start and update method. And the first thing, we need to let this slot know what type of attribute it is. So we'll make an attribute type variable here. Now just as a quick demonstration, if we go into Unity, we can open up our attribute prefab here. Let's go ahead and add the attribute slot script, and now we've got this drop-down menu so each slot can choose what type of attribute it represents. So for example, I could make my first one power. Now originally in the first video, I thought I'd set up this script to update the name and icon, but I'm realizing it's actually faster to just do it in the editor, so let's do that now. I'm just going to make this first one actually have the name of power, and then I'm just going to assign a different icon. I'll then go through and quickly do the same thing for each of these others, making sure that we set its enum first of all, change its name and its icon. All right, with that done, let's get back to scripting. So first of all, let's make a header here for our UI elements. And I'm going to start by creating a TextMesh Pro one, which will just be the value text. We'll of course need to add that we're using TM Pro. And in just a sec here, we're also going to need to be using UnityEngine.ui, so let's add that. Now, let's create the button, the reason we needed that UI namespace, and we'll call this one increase button. And then I'm also going to make another one that will refer to the decrease button. Our final UI element then will be the slider, which will just depict how we're doing with our points. Lastly, we'll need a reference to the progression manager, and we can just call this one manager. So now whenever we start up the game, we want to be able to set up these slots. So we'll make a method called setup, which is just going to take in a reference to the progression manager. Whenever this gets called, it'll store that reference to the manager. And then in a moment, we'll set this up so that it gets our increase and decrease buttons going, but we'll save that for just a second. Now down below, we need to add another method. This will be anytime our point value changes, we want to make sure to refresh the slot. So here, we'll just make a local variable. It'll just be the preview value, and it'll be equal to, here it'll talk to the manager and ask it for the value of whatever attribute matches what attribute this slot is. So if this slot is a power slot, it'll ask the manager to tell it how much power we have. Now the manager doesn't actually have that method yet, so let's create that quickly here. We'll come below our start method and just make a public integer method called getAttributeValue. So it'll just take in whatever type we want to get the value of. It's also going to take in a bool because it needs to know whether or not it's looking for the preview value or the base value. Now we want to be able to use this for both. So here we'll just add a return and we'll ask a question. Is it looking for the preview value? If so, this will spit out whatever the preview attribute total is for that type. And if it's not a preview, it'll spit out the base value. Now then, back in our slot, we'll just make sure that when it calls getAttributes, it says what type it is, and it also tells it that yes, we do in fact want the preview value, as that's the one we want to show the player. We'll then set the value text for this slot to be equal to whatever that preview value is. While we're at it, let's get our slider set up. So we'll just tell our slider that its max value is equal to, and here you can pick what your max is. I'm just going to go with 20 as I feel like that'll be fairly graphic with us starting at 10. I'll then also set the current value of the slider to be whatever the preview value is at. Okay, now we've got these setup and refresh methods, we just need to actually call them from somewhere. So back in the progression manager, we can return to those notes we left ourselves. First of all, in start, where we want to set up our slots, we're just going to create a for each loop here that'll loop through each of the attribute slots, we'll just call them slot, that happen to be in our attribute slot array. Now, we don't actually have an attribute slot array, we just have a little note here that we need to put that in, so let's do that now. This will just be a public array of all the different attribute slots that we have, called attribute slots. Now here's where I notice that I can't seem to do two S's together, so I'll just add those to both of these references and that'll get rid of the error. And so as soon as the game starts up, we'll just tell our slots that they need to run their setup method, and we'll pass along a reference to this script so they know where the manager is. I'm then just going to get rid of those brackets as I like to keep things condensed, but feel free to leave them there if you like them. We'll also just scroll down to a refresh UI where we have our last note that we need to refresh each of our slots. Here we'll do another for each loop, just like we did up above, where we go through all of the attribute slots, called slot, in our attribute slot array, and for each one we're just going to call its refresh method. Again, I'll get rid of those brackets because I like a nice trim script. In Unity now, let's go back into our prefab for the slots, and here now we can just start filling in some of these values. We'll drag in our value text, our increase and decrease buttons, make sure the slider's in here, and the manager we can actually leave empty as our code fills that all on its own. I just wanted to leave it public so we can actually see that it's working. We can then leave prefab mode, and here on our progression manager, we just want to make sure to lock the inspector. We can then shift click all of our attribute slots and drag them into that array. With that done, we're ready to give a test. Now this one will be a little bit underwhelming. That said, when we get in, we can see that our available points as well as our slot points are updating, and the slider is too, but it's having some issues. I'm not exactly sure what went wrong here, but you'll notice that our vitality slot is actually mostly correct. It's in the right spot, it's just a little too big. So we'll start with slot number 2. First of all, let's just open it up. And if I go to the fill here, I'm just going to change its rect transform to expand in all directions and then add a nice margin around the outside so that it only occupies the space where there's actually an outline to go with it. I'll then head to the slider, go to the bottom, and now when I drag, there we go, it's actually filling the area that it should. If I click on the attribute slot now and go to the overrides, we can apply those changes to each of the other slots. Now when I hit play, things are looking much better. Alright, so now we're displaying our stats, but we would like to actually be able to change them. So let's head back to our attribute slot, and here we're going to set up those increase and decrease buttons where we left the note before. To do this, we'll just start with our increase button. We're going to add an on-click listener. Here we'll use a lambda expression and just say that whenever the button is actually clicked, we want to tell our manager that it needs to modify an attribute. In this case, we'll have to tell it which attribute, which will be whatever type this slot represents. And since we're increasing, we'll want it to go up by 1. I'll then just copy this exact method, paste it in here, change it to the decrease button, and make sure that this one modifies the attribute by -1. Now back in Unity, if I click on one of those buttons and go to the bottom, you can see here we have this on click section. That's what our code is just doing. It's essentially going to fill this in and tell it what should happen when it gets clicked. Unfortunately, this doesn't serialize nicely, so when our code runs, we won't actually see anything appear there. It'll just do its job behind the scenes. Anyways, let's get rid of those red squigglies by heading into our progression manager, where we can actually create that modify attributes method. Here, the modify attributes just needs to know which attribute type and also whether it's adding or taking away. Now, whenever this gets called, we're going to create a local variable, which is just going to hold the current preview value. And here it's just going to ask our preview attributes to give us the value for that specific type of attribute. Now for our first run here, we're just going to use an if statement, which is going to check if the amount is greater than 0, so we're going up, and if our available points is less than or equal to 0. We want to stop us from overspending by just returning early and not running any more logic. And here's where I'll show you two options from this point. The first is going to be where we just can't decrease below 0. So if that's the case, then we want to just check if our amount is less than 0, so we're trying to go down, and the current preview is less than or equal to 0. We want to return. Now, if we're not trying to overspend and we're not trying to go below 0, we actually want to apply this change. So we'll tell our preview attributes to set this type of attribute to be whatever our current preview is plus the amount that got passed in, so either +1 or -1. At this point, we just want to tell our available points to subtract that amount so that it actually updates and doesn't let us spend forever. We'll then refresh our UI so that all of the numbers on screen match what we're trying to do. If we run a test now and we get in there, you will notice at first that actually we can't do anything. This actually just happens to do with what's going on in our player progression menu. If you click that, you'll see that in our canvas group, we currently have it so that it is interactable, but not blocking raycast, meaning that when we click with our mouse, the ray that gets cast just goes right through the menu. If you check that box, you should be able to use your buttons finally, and you'll notice that you can go down to 0, no problem. You just can't go below it. You'll also notice that 2 of my slots are updating every time I click that. That's just a little error I made. If I click the slot, you can see that slot 2 is vitality, and when I click the first slot, it is also vitality. That's why they're both updating. I'll just need to make sure that I fix that. The first one should be power. All right, now I'll come back to option 2 in just a sec, but first I want to make sure that we actually have a way to confirm and cancel our changes. So in the progression manager, let's make another method. This one's going to be public. We'll call it confirm changes. And this is essentially just going to overwrite our values so that the base attributes now line up with whatever our preview says. So to do that, we'll just say base attributes equals preview attributes, and we're actually going to also call the clone method at this point so that we get a new copy set for next time. We'll also get our starting point set back to our available points, fully setting up the new session, and make sure, of course, to refresh our UI. Now, I'm going to comment out that option 1 and show you an option 2, which is just that once confirmed, any stats in the base become permanent and can no longer be edited, unless later on you add an item maybe that allows you to recode or something like that. So to do that, first of all, we're just going to store an integer, which will be our permanent base, and it'll just get whatever the value is for the attribute we're looking at here. And now it'll just say, if the amount passed in is less than 0, so we're trying to take away a point, and our current preview value is less than the permanent value, we want to return. We just don't want to allow it to go below that permanent base. Back in Unity, we do need to set up that confirm button, so I'll just click it here, scroll down to the button component, and add an on-click listener. We can then drag in our progression manager and make sure that whenever it's called, it tells the progression manager to confirm. Now then, when we get in, I can add points, I can take them away, but if I confirm, now if I go back up and try to take away any points, I can't. They've been made permanent. I can still add that extra point and take it away in preview, but once confirmed, I lose the ability to take those points away anymore. All right then, final step is going to be to actually create a cancel button. For this, I'm just going to copy my confirm button and duplicate it. We'll name it cancel button. I'm just going to give it a simple X instead of confirm as text. I'll then drag it up into the top corner here and resize it so that it just kind of looks like a nice little close button. We'll then just pop into the progression manager, and below confirm changes, let's make a public void method to cancel our changes. This will just reset everything back to the base values and restore our available points. So to do this, we'll just get our preview attributes and set them so that they're equal to the base attributes clone once again. So they're just an exact copy. We'll then get our available points and set it back to that snapshot of the starting points. At this point, we can refresh our UI. All right, back in Unity now, let's click that cancel button, scroll down. You'll notice that since it's a copy, it already has an on-click listener, but now we want to make sure that it calls the progression manager cancel changes. All right, with that done, everything should be working. You can now get inside, add changes, and when you cancel them, it resets back to defaults. However, when you confirm, they become permanent. Hope you found this one helpful. In the next video, we'll make it so that our stats are actually updating based on these attributes, which is where things really start to get fun, as these are the things that are actually going to modify gameplay. Hope to see you in that video. Until then, though, this is Matt with Nightrun Studio. Cheers.